Oregon is one of only 5 states with its own federally approved OSHA state plan that regulates workplace heat exposure. Oregon OSHA has permanent heat illness prevention rules, and they use two critical temperature thresholds, 80 degrees Fahrenheit and 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Understanding the difference between these triggers is essential for both employers and workers. As stated on the official website of the Oregon Occupational Safety and Health Division at osha.oregon.gov, these rules were adopted to protect outdoor workers from a growing threat, extreme heat. When the heat index hits 80 degrees, employers must provide shade, cool drinking water, and implement a written heat illness prevention plan. When the heat index reaches 90 degrees, the rules get much stricter, mandating paid rest breaks and enhanced monitoring. Oregon's heat rules apply to every employer with workers exposed to heat in agriculture, construction, landscaping, delivery, warehousing, and forest activities. These rules are among the strongest in the nation, alongside California, Washington, Minnesota, and Colorado. They serve as a model as the federal OSHA works toward a national heat standard, something the United States has never had before. Scan the QR code on this slide to visit Oregon OSHA's official heat stress page at osha.oregon.gov for the full rules. Let's start with the 80-degree trigger, the first tier of Oregon's heat protection system. When the heat index reaches 80 degrees Fahrenheit, every employer with outdoor workers must take immediate action. First, provide accessible shade. Shade structures must be large enough to accommodate all workers on rest breaks, with open air circulation and located as close as possible to the work area. Second, supply cool drinking water. Employers must provide at least 1 quart of cool water per worker per hour and encourage workers to drink frequently even before they feel thirsty. Third, implement a written heat illness prevention plan, known as a HIP. This plan must cover how the employer will monitor heat, provide shade and water, handle emergencies, and train workers. Speaking of training, all workers and supervisors must be trained on heat illness risks before working in hot conditions. This includes recognizing symptoms of heat exhaustion and heat stroke, understanding emergency procedures, and knowing the importance of hydration. Finally, employers must have an acclimatization plan. New workers and those returning after 14 days away must be gradually exposed to heat over 5 to 7 days. Why is this so important? Because OSHA data shows that 50 to 70% of all heat-related fatalities occur on the first day of work in hot conditions. The QR code on this slide links to Oregon OSHA's official guidance on shade and water requirements. Now let's look at the 90-degree trigger, the high heat threshold where protections become significantly stricter. When the heat index reaches 90 degrees, all of the 80-degree protections still apply. Plus, new mandatory requirements kick in. The most important addition, mandatory paid rest breaks. Every worker must receive at least 10 minutes of paid rest break every 2 hours when the heat index is 90 degrees or higher. This is the minimum. Employers must provide longer or more frequent breaks if conditions warrant. Importantly, these rest breaks cannot be combined with meal periods. They are separate, paid breaks. Employers must also develop and implement a written rest break schedule for each shift. This schedule must be posted where all workers can see it. At the 90-degree trigger, employers must implement a system of observation and monitoring. This can be through supervisor monitoring, a buddy system, or regular self-check protocols. Any worker showing signs of heat illness must be relieved from duty and provided with shade and water immediately. Emergency procedures are also enhanced at 90 degrees. If emergency medical services cannot reach the worksite within 15 minutes, a first aid trained employee must be on site during high heat conditions. Here's a critical point. Oregon OSHA uses the heat index, not just air temperature, to determine the trigger. The National Weather Service heat index accounts for both temperature and humidity. This means the 90-degree trigger can be reached even when the air temperature is below 90 degrees on humid days. Employers must use the heat index, not a simple thermometer, to determine their obligations. Scan the QR code on this slide for Oregon OSHA's official rest break schedule guidance. Beyond the basic triggers, Oregon employers have comprehensive ongoing compliance obligations. Let's go through what a fully compliant employer must do. First, heat index monitoring. Employers must monitor the heat index at each worksite. The free OSHA NIOSH Heat Safety app, available for both iPhone and Android, is an accepted monitoring tool. Local weather station data or on-site measurement tools also work. Records of heat index monitoring must be kept for at least 30 days. Second, every employer must have a written emergency response plan for heat illness incidents. This plan must include first aid procedures, how to call 911, providing shade and water during emergencies, and designating someone to meet emergency responders at the worksite. Third, record keeping. All heat-related records, including the HEP, training logs, rest break schedules, heat index logs, and acclimatization records, must be retained for at least 3 years. These must be produced for Oregon OSHA compliance officers upon request. Fourth, employers must consider the effects of personal protective equipment on heat stress. Workers wearing heavy, non-breathable protective clothing or respirators may need additional rest breaks, even below the 90-degree threshold. And finally, please understand that indoor heat is also covered by Oregon's rules. This includes warehouses, manufacturing plants, commercial kitchens, and foundries where the heat index reaches 80 degrees. For indoor workspaces, shade means a cool-down area with air movement and reduced temperature. The QR code on this slide links to the free OSHA NIOSH Heat Safety app, which every employer and worker should have on their phone. As an Oregon worker, you have strong legal protections under these heat rules. Let's be very clear about what you are entitled to. First, you have the right to shade and cool drinking water whenever the heat index is 80 degrees or above. Your employer cannot require you to work without these basic protections. Shade must be available, not just promised. Second, at 90 degrees heat index, you are entitled to paid rest breaks, at least 10 minutes every 2 hours in shade with cool water. You cannot be forced to skip these breaks or required to work through them. Third, you have the right to report violations without fear of retaliation. Oregon law under ORS 654.062 prohibits employers from firing, demoting, or punishing workers for reporting safety violations. You can file a confidential complaint with Oregon OSHA at osha.oregon.gov. If you experience retaliation, you have the right to file a retaliation complaint within 30 days. Penalties for employers who retaliate can include reinstatement with back pay and punitive damages. For employers needing help, Oregon OSHA's consultation service offers free, confidential on-site consultations. That is osha.oregon.gov/consultation. Unlike enforcement inspections, consultations do not result in citations or penalties. Scan the QR code on this slide to file a complaint with Oregon OSHA directly. Why do these rules exist? Because extreme heat kills workers, and it is entirely preventable. According to the CDC and the Bureau of Labor Statistics, heat kills over 600 workers in the United States every year. Countless more suffer from heat exhaustion, kidney injury, and long-term health damage from chronic heat stress. Agriculture workers face 35 times the risk of heat-related death compared to the general workforce. Many of these workers are immigrant, temporary, or non-union workers who may be reluctant to demand protections without clear legal rights. Oregon's 2021 heat dome was a wake-up call. Temperatures hit 116 degrees in Portland. Workplaces were simply not prepared. Oregon OSHA adopted the permanent heat rules in direct response, building on lessons from California's and Washington's heat standards. Climate change is making things worse. The Oregon Climate Change Research Institute projects that by 2050, many parts of Oregon will experience over 30 days per year above 90 degrees. Heat stress is also cumulative. Even moderate heat, 80 to 85 degrees, causes dehydration, reduced cognitive function, and increased injury risk. Long-term exposure raises the risk of chronic kidney disease and cardiovascular problems. The QR code on this slide takes you to the CDC's Extreme Heat page at cdc.gov/extreme-heat for more information on the health impacts. Non-compliance with Oregon's heat rules carries serious consequences. Oregon OSHA actively enforces these rules through scheduled inspections, complaint investigations, and targeted enforcement during heat waves. Let's look at the penalty structure. A serious violation, which is issued when an employer knew or should have known about a hazardous heat condition, carries a maximum penalty of $15,625 per violation. A willful or repeat violation, when an employer intentionally disregards the rules, carries a maximum penalty of $156,250 per violation. In cases involving worker death or serious injury, criminal penalties may also apply. Oregon OSHA's Local Emphasis Program, A299, specifically targets industries with the highest heat risk: agriculture, construction, landscaping, warehousing, and delivery services. These industries face unprogrammed inspections during heat waves. Any workplace death from suspected heat stroke triggers a full investigation, and employers found at fault face maximum penalties, public citations, and potential criminal prosecution. Worker retaliation is also severely punished. An employer who retaliates against a worker for reporting heat violations can be ordered to reinstate the worker with back pay punitive damages, and face additional OSHA penalties. The QR code on this slide links to Oregon OSHA's penalty information page. How do Oregon's rules compare to the rest of the country? Oregon is one of only 5 states with their own OSHA-approved state plans that have adopted permanent heat standards. The others are California, which has had a heat standard since 2005, Washington, Minnesota, and Colorado. In all other states, federal OSHA enforces workplace safety, but there is currently no federal heat standard. Federal OSHA proposed a national heat standard in 2024. The proposed rule closely mirrors Oregon and California's two-tier structure, with 80 and 90-degree triggers, shade, water, and rest break requirements. Oregon's rules go further than the federal proposal in one important area: indoor heat. While the federal proposal focuses on outdoor work, Oregon's rules also apply to indoor workplaces like warehouses, manufacturing plants, and commercial kitchens where the heat index reaches 80 degrees. A national standard would level the playing field for employers and ensure all American workers, regardless of which state they live in, have the same basic heat protections. Until then, Oregon's rules stand as one of the strongest worker protections in the country. The QR code on this slide links to the federal OSHA heat proposal page, where you can read the proposed rule and submit comments. Let's summarize everything you need to know about Oregon's 2026 heat rules. Tier 1 begins at 80 degrees heat index. Employers must provide shade, cool drinking water, a written heat illness prevention plan, worker training, and an acclimatization plan for new workers. Tier 2 begins at 90 degrees heat index. All Tier 1 protections continue, plus mandatory paid rest breaks of at least 10 minutes every 2 hours, a written rest break schedule, enhanced monitoring, and emergency medical response planning. 6. Essential employer requirements. Monitor the heat index, provide shade and water, implement a written HIP, train all workers, give paid rest breaks at 90 degrees, and keep records for 3 years. Compliance is not optional. Penalties reach $156,250 per willful violation. Workers can file confidential complaints at osha.oregon.gov without fear of retaliation. Employers can get free, confidential consultation at osha.oregon.gov/consultation. Oregon's rules are a national model. As federal OSHA moves toward a national heat standard, the 80-degree and 90-degree framework is becoming America's standard for protecting workers from extreme heat. Know the rules, know your rights, stay safe. Scan the QR code on this slide for direct access to Oregon OSHA's official heat rules page.